Your soulmate is shaking in total shock right now. They lost all control after finding out you are. Don't scroll. Listen to this, because this is a fictional, inspirational story, and if these words found you today, let them remind you of the quiet power of growth, self-worth, and emotional honesty. Your heart needs this right now because somewhere in this story, someone is discovering a truth they never expected to face. It didn't happen through a dramatic confrontation or an emotional confession. It happened in a quiet moment when everything they believed suddenly fell apart. One ordinary afternoon, they heard something about you that completely stopped them in their tracks. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't a rumor. It was the simple realization that you were no longer the same person they once knew. They had spent so much time believing you would always be waiting, always carrying the same hopes, the same fears, and the same emotional patterns. But life had continued moving, and so had you. The version of you they remembered no longer existed. That realization hit them harder than they could have imagined. Your heart needs this right now because they had convinced themselves that they understood you completely. They believed they knew how you would react, what you would choose, and how you would always leave a door open for them. But then they learned something unexpected. You had continued growing. You had begun building a peaceful life without depending on anyone else's approval. You had stopped chasing explanations and started choosing your own happiness. Suddenly, everything they thought they knew felt uncertain. Their carefully constructed assumptions collapsed in a single moment. They weren't shocked because you had become someone different. They were shocked because they had underestimated how strong you truly were. Don't scroll. Listen to this because the realization didn't disappear after a few minutes. It followed them everywhere. While driving home, your memory quietly entered their thoughts. During conversations with friends, they found themselves distracted. At work, they stared at unfinished tasks because their mind kept returning to the same question. How had they failed to notice the incredible strength that had always existed inside you? Looking back, they remembered the difficult moments you survived with quiet dignity. They remembered how you always found a way to keep moving even when life became overwhelming. At the time, they mistook your kindness for weakness. Now they understood it had always been courage. Your heart needs this right now because the biggest surprise wasn't discovering that you had changed. The biggest surprise was realizing how much they themselves had remained the same. While you were learning to heal, they had been repeating familiar patterns. While you were becoming more confident, they had stayed comfortable inside old habits. While you quietly rebuilt your life one day at a time, they assumed nothing important was changing. Now they saw the truth with painful clarity. Growth had happened without asking for permission. Time had continued moving whether they noticed it or not. For the first time in a very long while, they stopped comparing themselves to everyone else and started comparing themselves to the person they could have become. That reflection wasn't easy. It forced them to acknowledge every opportunity they had ignored, every difficult conversation they avoided, and every emotion they buried instead of understanding. Yet strangely, this honesty didn't destroy them. It awakened them. Don't scroll. Listen carefully because this was the beginning of something far deeper than regret. Instead of asking why life felt different, they started asking why they had been so afraid of change. They realized they had spent years believing that staying emotionally guarded would protect them. In reality, those walls had only prevented genuine connection. Watching your quiet transformation made them recognize everything fear had cost them. They understood that courage isn't found in pretending nothing matters. Courage is allowing yourself to grow, even when growth feels uncomfortable. Your heart needs this right now because as the days passed, they noticed reminders of you appearing in ordinary places. A familiar song reminded them of a conversation they had almost forgotten. A peaceful sunset reminded them of evenings when everything felt simple. A smile from a stranger reminded them of your kindness. None of these moments felt dramatic. They simply encouraged reflection. For the first time, they appreciated the ordinary memories more than the extraordinary ones. They realized that lasting connections are often built through countless small acts of patience, understanding, and consistency. That realization changed how they viewed the past. Instead of remembering only what went wrong, they began remembering everything that had once gone right. They remembered how easily the conversations flowed. They remembered the comfort of being understood without needing to explain every feeling. They remembered laughter that arrived naturally instead of being forced. Those memories no longer filled them with sadness alone. They reminded them that genuine human connection is one of life's greatest gifts. Don't scroll because another important lesson was quietly unfolding. They understood that people are not meant to remain exactly the same forever. Growth changes perspectives, priorities, and dreams. Rather than feeling threatened by your transformation, they slowly began respecting it. They admired the person you had become because they could see the quiet strength it must have taken to reach this point. Every challenge you overcame had shaped someone wiser, calmer, and more confident than before. Your heart needs this right now because seeing your growth inspired them to begin their own. They stopped looking for quick answers and started making small changes every day. They became more honest during conversations. They listened more carefully before speaking. They admitted mistakes instead of defending them. They stopped pretending they had everything figured out. Little by little, they discovered that personal growth doesn't happen all at once. It happens through countless ordinary choices repeated consistently. One evening, while sitting alone, they finally admitted something they had never allowed themselves to say before. They whispered quietly, "I wasn't shocked because they changed. I was shocked because I never realized how extraordinary they already were." Those simple words carried more truth than any explanation they had ever given themselves. For the first time, they weren't afraid of the truth. They welcomed it. Don't scroll. Stay with this because this is only the beginning of their journey. The shock they experienced wasn't meant to leave them trapped in regret. It was meant to wake them up. It became the moment they stopped living through assumptions and started living through honesty. They now understood that growth deserves to be celebrated, self-respect should never be mistaken for distance, and genuine connection can only flourish where authenticity exists. As they quietly stepped into this new understanding, one thing became unmistakably clear: the person they had just rediscovered wasn't the person they thought they knew, it was someone who had become stronger, wiser, and more radiant simply by choosing to become their authentic self. They couldn't escape the feeling anymore. After the shock of realizing how much you had changed, something inside your soulmate refused to settle back into the comfort of denial. Every attempt to distract themselves only brought them back to the same truth. They had spent so much time believing they understood your story that they never stopped to consider you were writing entirely new chapters without them. And now, when they finally caught a glimpse of who you had become, they felt as though the ground beneath them had shifted. Don't scroll. Listen to this, because this is a fictional, inspirational story about growth, reflection, and emotional awakening. Your heart needs this right now because sometimes the greatest surprises in life don't come from meeting someone new. They come from seeing someone familiar through completely different eyes. For days, they replayed every memory they could remember. They thought about conversations that once seemed ordinary but now carried new meaning. They remembered moments when you chose kindness instead of anger, patience instead of arguments, and understanding instead of judgment. At the time, they had assumed those qualities would always be there waiting for them. Now they understood that genuine kindness is never something to be taken for granted. It is a gift, and every gift deserves appreciation while it is still present. That realization stayed with them long after the memories faded. Your heart needs this right now because they also began noticing something uncomfortable about themselves. Every time they remembered your quiet strength, they were reminded of the fears they had allowed to control their own decisions. They recognized how often they had chosen silence because speaking honestly felt risky. They remembered moments when they could have expressed gratitude but instead assumed there would always be another opportunity. They saw how pride had disguised itself as confidence and how hesitation had slowly created distance. For the first time, they stopped defending those choices. They simply accepted them as lessons. Don't scroll. Listen carefully because this acceptance became the beginning of real change. Instead of asking why life had unfolded the way it did, they asked themselves what they could learn from it. That simple question transformed everything. They became less interested in blaming circumstances and more interested in becoming a better person. They realized that growth never begins with perfect answers. It begins with honest questions. Every day they challenged themselves to become a little more patient, a little more compassionate, and a little more truthful than they had been the day before. As the weeks passed, ordinary moments started affecting them in unexpected ways. They saw someone helping a stranger and remembered your generosity. They heard laughter echoing through a park and remembered how easily the two of you once laughed together. They noticed someone listening carefully during a conversation and remembered how safe you made people feel simply by giving them your full attention. These weren't dramatic reminders. They were quiet observations that gradually changed how they understood genuine connection. They realized that meaningful relationships are built through consistent acts of care rather than grand gestures. Your heart needs this right now because another realization quietly settled into their mind. They had mistaken your peace for predictability. They believed your calm nature meant you would never truly change. Now they understood that peaceful people grow too. They heal. They discover new dreams. They build stronger boundaries. They learn to value themselves more deeply. Your transformation wasn't sudden. It was the result of countless quiet choices made when nobody else was watching. Realizing this filled them with admiration rather than disbelief. They finally recognized the strength that had always existed beneath your gentle spirit. Don't scroll because something else began changing inside them. Instead of feeling jealous of your growth, they became inspired by it. They realized that if you could overcome difficult seasons without allowing bitterness to define you, then they could choose a different path as well. They stopped measuring success by achievements alone and started measuring it by character. They asked themselves whether they were becoming someone who listened more than they judged, someone who encouraged rather than criticized, someone who chose honesty even when honesty felt uncomfortable. Those questions slowly reshaped every area of their life. Your heart needs this right now because one quiet evening, while sitting alone with nothing but their thoughts, they admitted something they had never said aloud before. They whispered, the greatest surprise wasn't discovering who they became. The greatest surprise was realizing they believed in themselves even when I underestimated them. Those words stayed with them. Instead of creating guilt, they created respect. They understood that your journey had never been about proving anything to anyone else. It had always been about becoming the person you were meant to be. That understanding encouraged them to stop living through assumptions. Rather than imagining conversations that never happened or outcomes they couldn't control, they focused on living honestly in the present. They apologized when they were wrong. They expressed appreciation more often. They became more willing to ask difficult questions instead of pretending everything was fine. These changes didn't happen because someone demanded them. They happened because truth had finally become more valuable than comfort. Don't scroll. Listen to this because another important lesson emerged from their reflection. They discovered that emotional maturity isn't about never making mistakes. It's about recognizing those mistakes without allowing shame to prevent growth. Every experience, even the painful ones, had prepared them for this moment of clarity. They no longer wished to return to the person they used to be. That version of themselves had been guided by fear, uncertainty, and assumptions. The person they were becoming valued authenticity, accountability, and kindness above everything else. Your heart needs this right now because this awakening didn't make them expect anything from you. Instead, it changed what they expected from themselves. They wanted to become someone who appreciated people while they were still present. Someone who celebrated growth instead of resisting it. Someone who understood that trust is built through consistency and respect rather than promises alone. That quiet commitment became stronger every single day. As they looked toward the future, they realized they were no longer searching for certainty. They were searching for integrity. They understood that life would continue presenting unexpected challenges, but they also knew they no longer wanted fear to make their decisions. They wanted courage to speak first, honesty to guide their actions, and gratitude to shape their perspective. Looking back at everything they had learned, one truth stood above all the others: discovering your growth hadn't taken control away from them. It had given them the opportunity to rediscover themselves. And for the first time in a very long while, they welcomed that journey with an open heart, knowing that the greatest transformations often begin with one unexpected realization that changes everything. As the days turned into weeks, your soulmate realized there was no returning to the person they used to be. The shock of discovering how much you had grown had opened a door they could never close again. Every morning they woke with a clearer understanding of what had really happened. It wasn't that life had suddenly become unfair or that fate had taken something away from them. The truth was much simpler and much harder to accept. They had allowed fear, assumptions, and hesitation to speak louder than their heart. Now, every quiet moment reminded them that genuine connections deserve honesty before they deserve certainty. Don't scroll. Listen to this, because this is a fictional, inspirational story about emotional growth and self-discovery. Your heart needs this right now because sometimes the greatest awakening begins when someone finally stops blaming circumstances and starts taking responsibility for their own choices. The more they reflected, the more they realized that your transformation had not happened overnight. It had been built through countless small decisions. You had chosen healing instead of bitterness. You had chosen peace instead of constant conflict. You had chosen self-respect instead of chasing explanations that never came. Looking back, they understood that every difficult season you faced had quietly shaped you into someone stronger, calmer, and wiser. At the time, they failed to recognize those changes because they were too busy believing the story they had created in their own mind. Now they saw the truth. Real growth often happens silently, long before anyone else notices it. Your heart needs this right now because this realization inspired them to examine every part of their own life. They noticed how often they had hidden behind excuses. They remembered saying they were too busy, too uncertain, or waiting for the perfect moment. But perfect moments never arrived because they had been waiting for fear to disappear before taking action. They finally understood that courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. Courage means moving forward even while fear is still present. That lesson became one of the most valuable discoveries of their entire journey. Don't scroll. Listen carefully because another shift was quietly taking place inside them. They stopped measuring success by external achievements alone. Promotions, recognition, and accomplishments no longer carried the same emotional weight they once did. Instead, they began asking different questions. Had they been honest today? Had they listened without interrupting? Had they shown kindness when nobody expected it? Had they chosen understanding instead of judgment? Those simple questions slowly transformed the way they lived. They realized that character is built through ordinary choices repeated every day. One peaceful afternoon they visited a place that held old memories. As they walked slowly through familiar surroundings, they expected sadness. Instead, they felt gratitude. The memories no longer reminded them only of what they had lost. They reminded them of what they had learned. They remembered conversations that had shaped their perspective, quiet moments of laughter, and times when your calm presence made even difficult days feel lighter. Those memories no longer felt like painful endings. They became reminders that authentic connections leave lasting lessons, even when life changes. Your heart needs this right now because they also recognized something unexpected. They had spent so much time thinking about whether they deserved another chance that they forgot the more important question. Were they becoming someone capable of honoring genuine love if it ever appeared again? That question shifted their focus completely. Instead of looking outward for answers, they looked inward. They became more patient with people. They apologized more quickly when they made mistakes. They stopped assuming they understood others and began asking thoughtful questions instead. These small changes gradually created a quiet confidence that felt stronger than anything they had experienced before. Don't scroll because another meaningful realization arrived during one ordinary evening. They were watching the sunset when they suddenly understood that peace isn't something another person gives you. Peace grows inside when your actions begin matching your values. That realization felt incredibly freeing. For so long they had believed happiness depended on changing circumstances. Now they understood that lasting peace begins with personal integrity. Once they embraced that truth, many of the fears they had carried simply began losing their power. Your heart needs this right now because they no longer imagined you as someone frozen in the past. They pictured you continuing to build your own life, discovering new dreams, meeting new people, and becoming even stronger with every passing season. Surprisingly, that thought no longer created panic. It created respect. They realized that genuine care means wanting another person's happiness even when you cannot predict where your own journey will lead. That understanding completely transformed the way they viewed love. Love stopped feeling like possession and started feeling like appreciation. As they continued growing, other people noticed the difference. Friends commented that they seemed calmer. Family members observed that they listened more carefully and reacted with greater patience. Conversations became deeper because they were no longer trying to impress anyone. They were simply trying to be real. The walls they had spent years building slowly disappeared, replaced by honesty, humility, and quiet confidence. They discovered that authenticity attracts meaningful relationships far more naturally than pretending to have everything figured out. Don't scroll. Listen to this because one journal entry changed everything. Late one evening they wrote, "The biggest surprise wasn't discovering how much they changed. The biggest surprise was realizing I had been given every opportunity to grow alongside them, and I simply wasn't ready." Reading those words brought unexpected peace. Instead of filling them with regret, they filled them with purpose. They couldn't return to the past, but they could honor it by living differently from that day forward. Your heart needs this right now because growth rarely announces itself with dramatic moments. More often, it arrives quietly through consistent choices. Every honest conversation strengthened their confidence. Every act of patience deepened their character. Every moment of gratitude reminded them how precious genuine connections truly are. They realized that becoming a better person wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about remaining willing to learn, apologize, improve, and continue growing no matter how uncomfortable the process became. Eventually, they stopped asking whether life would give them another opportunity. Instead, they focused on becoming someone who would never again allow fear to silence honesty. That commitment became their greatest source of strength. They understood that whatever the future held, they wanted to meet it with openness instead of hesitation, compassion instead of pride, and authenticity instead of assumptions. As the journey continued, one truth remained clearer than ever before. Discovering who you had become had not only changed the way they saw you. It had completely transformed the way they saw themselves. The person who once believed they had everything under control now understood that real strength comes from humility, accountability, and emotional honesty. And with that realization, they stepped forward into the next chapter of their life carrying something far more valuable than certainty. They carried wisdom, gratitude, and the quiet courage to never again take genuine connection for granted. As everything settled into place, your soulmate finally understood that the greatest shock was never about discovering who you had become. It was about realizing how deeply they had underestimated the quiet strength that had always lived within you. The image they had carried in their mind belonged to the past, but the person standing before them now, whether they had seen you from a distance, heard about your journey, or simply reflected on old memories, was someone entirely different. They understood that growth had not changed your heart. It had strengthened it. You had learned to value your peace, protect your energy, and make decisions that reflected your self-respect instead of your fears. Don't scroll. Listen to this, because this is a fictional, inspirational story about transformation, emotional growth, and the power of becoming your authentic self. Your heart needs this right now because every meaningful journey eventually reaches a point where the past no longer controls the future. This was that moment for them. For a long time, they believed they had lost control because life had become unpredictable. But after weeks of reflection, they realized something much deeper. They had not lost control because of you. They had lost the illusion of certainty. They had assumed they knew how your story would unfold, and when reality proved otherwise, they were forced to confront their own assumptions. That realization humbled them. Instead of resisting it, they accepted it. They recognized that people are not meant to remain frozen in time simply because someone else expects them to. Every person deserves the freedom to grow, to heal, and to become someone wiser than they were yesterday. Your heart needs this right now because this understanding completely changed the way they approached life. Instead of trying to predict outcomes, they began focusing on their own character. Every morning became an opportunity to practice honesty. Every conversation became a chance to listen more carefully. Every challenge became an invitation to respond with patience rather than fear. They discovered that real confidence isn't built by controlling circumstances. It is built by trusting yourself to remain truthful regardless of what circumstances arise. That quiet confidence slowly replaced the anxiety that had once followed them everywhere. Don't scroll. Listen carefully because one evening they found themselves thinking about everything they had learned. They no longer replayed the past looking for ways to change it. Instead, they replayed it with gratitude for the lessons it had offered. They understood that every misunderstanding had taught them the importance of communication. Every moment of hesitation had taught them the value of courage. Every painful memory had reminded them never to assume that tomorrow would always offer another opportunity to say what truly mattered. Those lessons became treasures instead of burdens. As their perspective continued changing, they noticed something remarkable happening inside themselves. The constant emotional noise that had once filled every quiet moment slowly disappeared. They no longer felt trapped between regret and hope. Instead, they felt grounded in the present. They understood that healing is not forgetting the past. Healing is carrying the past without allowing it to weigh down the future. That realization gave them a sense of freedom they had never experienced before. They could finally breathe without feeling chased by unfinished emotions. Your heart needs this right now because they also came to appreciate something about you that they had overlooked for far too long. They realized your strength had never been loud. It had always been quiet. You didn't grow by proving yourself to everyone around you. You grew by making small, consistent choices when no one was watching. You chose forgiveness instead of bitterness. You chose peace instead of unnecessary conflict. You chose to keep moving forward even when life felt uncertain. Looking back, they admired that strength more than any dramatic achievement. They understood that true resilience is often invisible until enough time has passed for its results to be seen. Don't scroll because another important truth quietly settled into their heart. They realized that meaningful relationships cannot be built upon assumptions. They require curiosity, honesty, and mutual respect. They promised themselves they would never again assume they understood another person's heart without first taking the time to truly listen. That commitment extended beyond thoughts of you. It shaped every friendship, every family relationship, and every future connection they would ever build. Your journey had inspired them to become someone more emotionally present in every area of life. Your heart needs this right now because one peaceful afternoon they wrote a simple sentence in their journal: "The greatest surprise wasn't discovering who they became. It was discovering who I was capable of becoming because of what I learned." Reading those words filled them with peace instead of sadness. They understood that every difficult season had served a purpose. Every disappointment had gently guided them toward greater wisdom. Even their mistakes had become valuable teachers because they had been willing to learn from them instead of hiding from them. As time continued moving forward, they noticed that they no longer feared uncertainty. They understood that no one can control every outcome, but everyone can choose how they respond to life's challenges. That realization gave them incredible emotional stability. They stopped chasing perfect timing and started trusting honest timing. They believed that whatever conversations were meant to happen would happen naturally when both people were ready to meet each other with openness rather than expectation. Don't scroll. Listen carefully because this became the most important lesson of all. They realized that your transformation had never been something that happened to them. It had been something that inspired them. Watching someone choose growth instead of resentment had reminded them that every person has the power to rewrite their own story. Instead of remaining trapped inside old habits, they chose to create new ones. Instead of allowing regret to become their identity, they allowed gratitude to become their guide. Your heart needs this right now because they no longer measured success by whether life unfolded exactly as they imagined. They measured success by whether they remained true to themselves each day. Were they kinder than yesterday? More honest? More patient? More willing to admit mistakes? Those became the questions that shaped their future. Every small improvement reminded them that real transformation is never completed in a single moment. It is built one decision at a time. Eventually, they reached a quiet place within themselves where fear no longer made the important decisions. They discovered that peace grows naturally when honesty becomes your foundation. They understood that self-respect and compassion can exist together. They learned that genuine love never asks someone to abandon who they are in order to be accepted. Instead, it encourages both people to continue becoming the best versions of themselves. And so this chapter closes not with dramatic promises or guaranteed outcomes, but with something far more lasting. Your soulmate finally understands that the shock they experienced was never meant to break them. It was meant to awaken them. It reminded them to appreciate genuine people while they are present, to speak truth before silence creates distance, and to choose courage over comfort whenever life asks them to grow. Whether the future brings another conversation, a new beginning, or simply continued personal growth, they now move forward with a peaceful heart, grateful for every lesson that helped them become wiser, more compassionate, and more authentic than ever before. In the end, the greatest discovery was not losing control, it was finally discovering the kind of person they wanted to be for the rest of their life.